And we are delighted to be partnering with Pinebrook Family Answers and have them sharing their wisdom and expertise in unpacking some of the challenging behavior our teachers are facing. Today, we have Ann Compostela, Director of Family-Based Mental Health Services, Robin Carmody, Clinical Supervisor of School-Based Behavioral Health Services, and Leslie Tenbrook, Vice President of Clinical Services. So without further ado, coaches, take it from here.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us today. So we're kind of excited to do this. We sort of envision this as, why we call it office hours is because, you know, in college or high school, you pop into your professor's office just to ask any kind of random question that comes into your mind, because that's what they're there for during their office hours. So that's really kind of what we are hoping to have today. So what we'd like to see is we have a number of the topics that people submitted when they registered for this training. So we're going to go through those. And but at any time, please, we highly encourage you to throw something into the chat, especially if it's a specific situation that you're dealing with that's really difficult. For instance, you have a student in your classroom, they're behaving in a certain way, you've tried something, it didn't work. We would love to take that opportunity to talk you through it. You can be anonymous, of course, we won't throw you under the bus. But if you want to put that in the chat, then we'll go ahead and we'll address that in real time. So if we're talking about a different topic and you pop something into the chat, then we'll go ahead and pick that up from there. And you know, until we have that though, we have all of the questions that you guys submitted when you registered for training. So the first thing that we'll talk about, and we're going to sort of take turns addressing these different topics, is a big one, and that's the rise in mental health concerns: depression, anxiety, panic attacks, isolation, and we're going to talk throughout the training about the role of trauma as well. So there's a couple important things to think about when we're talking about the rise in mental health concerns. And again, we'll probably be circling back to this throughout. And that's if somebody has a mental health condition, depression, anxiety, whatever it is, or even a more severe condition, and that person is under a lot of stress, then the likelihood is that those symptoms are going to increase or get worse. And right now, every single one of us is under a lot of stress, whether that's pandemic stress or political stress or snow stress, whatever it is, we're all kind of in the same situation right now. So if any of us have a diagnosed mental health condition, we could very well see an increase, and we have seen, and at some point I'll pass it over to Ann, but we have seen an increase in referrals for mental health services. We've seen an increase in symptoms and problematic behavior related to some of those diagnoses. And then I'll kick it over to Ann next, but before I do that, something to think about too is a lot of the behavior that we see in the classrooms look like one sort of problem and maybe a completely different problem. So depression doesn't always look like someone who's sad, especially for kids and teenagers. It can be someone who's irritable or avoidant. So we're going to talk about that throughout as well, but just something to keep in mind. I'll kick it to Ann and then Robin, but Ann, what are you seeing in terms of an increase in mental health symptoms as your clinicians go out there into the community, because they go into the homes, work with the families? What are you seeing?
Well, we're seeing an absolute increase in both referrals and just overall problematic behaviors, depression on the part of the children we serve, as well as an increase with the adults in the home. We're also doing telehealth with families as well. So we're doing a little bit of both at this time. And a lot of these things, as I read over them, are some of the same struggles that our family-based providers are also struggling with on occasion. So there's definitely a lot more depression, a lot more high-level risk behaviors that where we might have had some suicidal ideation last year. Example, you know, we have a child drinking bleach. So it's definitely, the stakes have become much higher. We have noticed in the last 6 months, and it's definitely something impacting the mental health providers as well as the families, and yeah.
Okay.
Everywhere. It's all of us.
Yep. And Robin, you work in the schools, so tell us what your experience is and what you're
Correct.
seeing.
I'm seeing both students who are e-learners as well as students who are in a hybrid situation, and anxiety is a big concern. kids who are e-learning. They're not sure how to navigate this. They're tired of being on a computer, just like all of us. So it's been a lot of, engagement, how to engage them when they're don't want to look at a computer again with you with the telehealth, possibly making a visit to the home and just getting them out for a walk. And also the depressive symptoms of being isolated. We have kids who just stay in their room, playing their video games or on the screen, or, sleeping longer, switching their days and nights. So then they're not participating in school. So it's many things.
I imagine that you're probably seeing a lot of difficulty sleeping. You probably
Absolutely.
wouldn't see the appetite,
Mhm.
but I think the sleep
Yeah.
things are probably huge. And then the sleep problems, which go along with depression and anxiety, are probably pretty severely impacting school behavior.
Absolutely. We have kids who are not sleeping at all. They'll, and they will not, sign into a class because they just gone to bed an hour earlier. So yeah.
Wow. All right. And that's actually a good segue, because another topic on our list of things that were submitted is exhaustion. So I
Mhm.
guess, we're talking about exhaustion. Me, the teacher, the student, who are we talking about here? So Robin, let me toss that one to you.
Sure. I think that's across the board. What I talk with my students about, and even some of our staff, is having realistic priorities in your life. You don't have to do those sink of dishes. You don't have to do, things that were expected of you because we're in a different situation. Same with students. Take 5 minutes, go for a walk, do something different to, change up your mind and stuff, so that you're not absolutely having, Zoom fatigue, which is definitely a thing. The tiredness is true. I work on sleep hygiene with kids, as far as, turning off devices, the hardest thing to do with a teenager. And, just having a quiet room, music, however they want to do it, in order to, have a bedtime, have a sleep time. I talked to them about when they were babies and how that was something that they did. You were on a schedule. It's very important. So yes, but sleep is very important and causing the exhaustion. I also have students and have worked with students who may prefer to be sleeping during the day because the family situation may be so tense. So if they're up all night, everyone else is sleeping and it's kind of just them talking to their friends. So that's something I found a lot more so during the beginning of the pandemic, when check-ins with school weren't as structured, but that's something they definitely are doing.
So Robin, the way it works, I won't identify your school, but the way it works in your school, if a child is in, back in normal times in the classroom and they're having what looks like mental health problems, what does that look like in the school, that from the teacher's first identification as, I think this is a problem? What happens maybe in your school, but typically in schools to
Okay, in our school, the teacher, counselor, whomever notices something of concern first, would do a SAP referral. It's part of the student assistance program, and then that would then go to the different SAP teams. It would be discussed amongst the guidance counselors, admin, and decided on what would be best. We fortunately have a lot of services in our school that we can send the student to, or we can find outside services that may benefit them.
Okay, so that the teacher notices something, then they pass it on to maybe the school counselor, and then there's a whole process. Now, my understanding from a lot of schools is some schools are they're able to do their student assistance referrals or their child study team referrals, and it's going really, really well. Other teams in other schools seem to have sort of maybe fallen apart. And now I know you're only in one school. Are you hearing anything like that from your colleagues?
Yes, some work smoother than others. We are very fortunate that we have a great SAP team. So we have been able to navigate it. It's taken a while to get us to where we are, but we also have a community and schools person who helps out with that. So it has been challenging. Trying to host meetings virtually is also challenging as far as SAP team meetings, but we're getting it done as best we can. And also with this situation that we're in right now with the pandemic, if there's a student that becomes a high flyer that a counselor may be concerned with, there's more of a direct route. They could reach out to me and say, hey, we think this has happened. I'm going to SAP them now, but can you touch base with them? So, and that's how we would do that.
Okay. And I think it's probably frustrating, and maybe Ann, I'll kick this one to you too, but even the counselors, the school counselors and other providers in the community are doing, gosh, we're all doing Zoom sessions or team sessions, just telehealth. So it's pretty hard, I think, for everybody to, what we might see in the classroom isn't what we're seeing, over the screen. So I don't know, and what are your people struggling with in terms of trying to assess things over Zoom and try to figure things out? What's the difficulty there?
Well, I think there are some people who are much more comfortable with the technology, with Zoom, with the ability to be creative online, and there are others who the in-person is much more successful. Our program in general, that's what we are intended to do, but we find that there is a lot of difficulty because home life has changed. Just home life has changed. We have a lot of families where parents who used to be at work are now home. There's a lot of aggravation going on. Maybe it's creating an issue first thing in the morning in the home. So they might not be logging on or getting on our sessions because they're over here having an argument with their brother or with their family member, or something happened there. So that may impeding it. We have a lot of, I know, the teams and families who feel like, oh my gosh, we're always on this computer, always on this. I know initially for myself, when this started, it was like, wow, isn't it wonderful? We have all this technology that we can do all of our meetings online, and this is great. We're not going to skip a beat. I know for myself, I'm an in-person person, and I am really starting to struggle with this. So I can imagine just with meeting with my teams, talking with families, and definitely the teams feeling like it's tiring. I loved that Robin said Zoom fatigue. So I can imagine what the educators are going through day in and day out, class after class after class, and the exhaustion. And then the added thing, they may also have children at home. There are many of you who might have children at home who are now e-learning. So trying to balance that as well, something that we didn't have to do in the past. And I know it's impacting families who we're working with. It's impacting team members who are in those situations as well. So it's definitely more fatiguing than I ever expected. So I see that as a huge issue for us too.
Yeah. One of the topics that came up on our list is inattention, and that came up over and over again in so many different ways. Like the kids either are not paying attention on Zoom, or they're turning off their camera, or chatting with their friends. And we talked a little bit about this before we started the training, and about accountability and expectations for that. Anne, can you touch on that a little bit?
My thought about it was that if they were in an in-person situation, there would be certain expectations that educators would have, or people working with children would have, regarding what the limits are and what's appropriate during these sessions, during classes. And I was wondering, why is that different now? I think that it might be really important that structure remains both for the student as well as for the person doing the teaching, because you keep yourself empowered and be able to follow what you knew you were doing before. Maybe not as flexible with those pieces. But if a child isn't paying attention with us, if we have sessions, there are certain expectations that we have of families, whether we're in the home or we're online. And those are expected to be followed. If not, we're going to address that. So
that's a good point. And I think that on one hand, teachers are getting the message that, oh, everything is so stressful, you have to be flexible. You have to understand these mental health symptoms are emerging, or if the kid has trauma. But on one hand, we're telling them to be more flexible. On the other hand, we're saying, sometimes you just need to hold these kids accountable. Like, we're assuming they can't stay on the camera.
I think that it's important to be flexible, and at least in the sense, particularly of understanding that what they are seeing during teleeducation may not be the behavior they would be seeing in school, because circumstances in everybody's life have changed, and there are greater stressors, and mental health issues are definitely spiking. However, I think that the structure that the system provides for the children we all serve is really important. It's an important piece. It's important in what we do. I know with our mental health program, trying to help families build more structure. So if that piece is reduced through the schoolwork, where it's like, okay, we need to be really flexible on this, I think that that also can take away from the power of the teacher and also allow the child to feel like, well, it doesn't matter if I do it or don't do it.
Right. Right. That it's not optional.
Yeah, I believe, I think it was, and I'm not sure if it was Robin, someone had brought up earlier, and maybe wants to speak to the expectations.
Yeah, setting expectations. Just a little bit to touch on what you said, Anne. I have a 7th grader at home that's not doing so well with the virtual learning. He definitely thinks it's all free time. And I remember a teacher saying, okay, well, you didn't do this assignment, so I'll give you an extra week to do it. And I thought, oh my gosh. And I think I even responded to that teacher. It's like, no, he doesn't need an extra week to do it. He needs to be held accountable because, he wasn't paying attention or didn't get it done. So I think that is a really tough line that teachers are walking between accountability and flexibility. And because everything is different now, this is different, and there's no standard that we're used to because it's all different. And let's talk a little bit about setting expectations, but let me kick it to Robin first and see if you have any thoughts about that accountability, that attention piece.
Sure. I also think, I have a lot of respect for teachers right now, because not only are you dealing with just the academic end of it, but you're also dealing with kids who are at home. They may be watching siblings. Is it the right thing to be doing? Absolutely not. Is the only thing they can do for their family? Yes. So if you have a student who is, decided to become an e-learner when it was a choice and really wasn't their decision, but they're home helping siblings or helping siblings with their e-learning as well, those things also have to be taken into consideration as far as expectations go. There's so many levels to it, similar to the way we are feeling at home. A lot of these kids are feeling the same way. So teachers now, I found, are doing a great job of trying to make the kids accountable, but also realizing that, oh, wait, maybe there's something else going on here, and digging deeper to see that.
That's a really good point, because I know another school-based provider was telling me that some of her kids they're elementary school kids, and they're being supervised by a 12 or 13-year-old sibling.
Right.
Who is like probably, needs to be doing their own e-learning at the same time, but they're also trying to make their sibling do it. So that's got to be really challenging. And my heart goes out to these parents that are trying to make ends meet or working a couple jobs, trying to put food on the table in a lot of cases. And that's a really kind of important segue to understanding what these kids are going through at home. And in the trauma-informed schools that we work with, the emphasis really is on understanding what they are going through or may be going through, because we don't always know. So if you have a student that's really struggling with difficulties at home, which could be anything. I mean, there could be, parents not available, or God forbid, something even more serious like domestic violence or substance abuse in their home. All of that is likely to get worse right now. And they're not going to tell us about it. They might tell their counselor, but right now they're just trying to get through like all of us are. So I want to talk a little bit about kids' ability to regulate their emotions, or, just basically manage their feelings, but also how to express them, the thoughts and feelings that they have. So a child or a young person who's not able to express feelings very well or manage their feelings really well, that all gets worse under stress. And, stress that they've had in the past, maybe it's experiences of trauma that are still staying with them in many ways, as trauma tends to do, or additional trauma. Like I said at one point to somebody that right now we're all experiencing like severe fight or flight right now with the stress that we're going through. So we're going to have kids that are maybe they're already not so great at managing their emotions. Maybe they are frustrated and they're yelling at the teacher, or just shutting off their camera because they can't deal with the frustration anymore. So that kind of takes me back to a child who's expressing something. It may be a different kind of feeling. So a child who's yelling at the teacher, or just mad and turning off their camera because they don't want to deal anymore, that might look like anger to the teacher, especially if there's bad language or volume raised. But it could really be so many other things, and likely be something like frustration or even anxiety. Think about a time when you felt really, really anxious and you just could not handle one more thing. And then, boom, online, they just can't deal. So, a kid who might have walked out of the classroom in regular times, just simply, it's a lot easier now. You just shut off the screen. I just can't deal with this teacher right now. Bam, and you're gone. So there's not a whole lot of control we have over that as a teacher. But I think when we look at that, we look at, is this something new for this child? Is this a new kind of behavior? Is this a change in
Yes.
behavior for this child? I think one of the major issues that teachers are facing is that we started this school year like this. So we might not know what's normal for that child. So you're really kind of flying blind with a lot of that. Do either of you have anything about like emotional regulation, emotional management, that kind of thing?
I think a key thing here, Leslie, that you just made the point of, some of these teachers have not even met these students face to face.
Mhm.
So a kid who has had trauma or is experiencing difficulties at home, they don't know, they don't have that relationship set up with this kid. And as we know, as therapists, relationship is the key thing. So some of these students are coming in and you've never met them, where they may come into your classroom and you're having a chat about something. So putting that into a virtual setting could probably help as well. Silly games, playing, tell me 2 things you enjoy, 2 things you don't enjoy, just, almost like icebreakers constantly, because it's constantly changing. And to get to know these kids that you've just met through a computer. And I've also experienced this as a therapist, because if we are receiving e-learners on our caseload, to make that first introduction on computer is very difficult to start the relationship. And you could see how that would be in the classroom as well, except you're doing with 30 kids at once.
That's a good point, Anne.
I was thinking the exact same thing. That was wonderful, Robin. For us, joining is so integral to what we do. And I was thinking myself, what we utilize often is doing some icebreaker type of activities, taking 5 minutes, maybe at the beginning of a class, or even one of the things, because we deal with emotional self-regulation as part of our model, okay, at the beginning of class, okay, let's all take a deep breath together. Take a moment before we begin. Let's take 15 seconds. Let's take a deep breath. And then I think that's something that we also utilize if partway through a session and maybe partway through a class, if you see you're starting to lose people or people are starting to get edgy and anxious, where you can say, okay, let's take a moment again, and everybody, let's take that breath again. Let's relax, let's regroup. Okay, let's try. I think they're really good ways to just kind of bring people back together, take that moment to, all right, it's okay. And I also, one other thing I want to mention as far as emotional self-regulation, where we're thinking about differently, frustration, anger, depression. There's also a change in the fact that there are some children now who are home alone doing schooling, who have never been home alone. And some of them, at least in our experience, even some of the older kids are frightened. They're home and they have no one to watch out for them. Not all of our children live in the best areas or have the safest environments. So I think that also is added in there. But I think that just recognizing, taking a look at who you're working with and where they at, using those little icebreakers, little games, quick things that you can throw in, or some quick relaxation, let's take a breath together. It has been very, very helpful for our families, at least in regrouping.
That's a great idea. And I'm going to jump back to you in a minute, because we're going to talk about fears and how that plays into, the fears of COVID and so on. But I want to talk about the chat. Somebody asked the question, have teachers provided basic written expectations to their students so the students are aware and can refer back to those expectations? So I think, something in writing is always good. But I know that in a lot of our behaviorist settings, what we do is we actually review the expectations at the beginning of every single class or every single group. It takes maybe 30 seconds to a minute to just, whether the leader or the teacher states them, or we call on the kids and have them state them. But what are the expectations for Zoom, guys? So everybody like throw out one. What's an expectation? Put it in the chat. And just, can have a little bit of fun with it too. And that's expressing like what is everybody expected to do? Keep your camera on in unless there's extenuating circumstances. We need to be paying attention, responding, whatever it is. So just a handful of expectations at the beginning of every class or every session can be really, really helpful. So I think that's a good idea. Just reiterating what Anne said, we did a similar discussion with early childhood learning centers, and they liked the idea that they were going to come up with a like a slogan that they could yell out. So they could stand up, take a deep breath, maybe jump up in the air, yell out some like, "We got this," or some slogan that they would all choose together. But the advantage of that is a couple things. It allows them to release that tension that they have, get a little bit more energy in case they're bored. But it also, as Anne says, brings them together. So they're all doing this together. So there's a feeling of like unity and cohesion for that. So before we go back to that, I want to touch base on something else that is in the chat. And this person says that they see fewer externalizing behaviors in their classroom. Externalizing behavior is somebody who expresses their emotions outwardly, like aggression or vocally, or even hurting themselves, hurting somebody else. But we see an increase in kids struggling with depression and internalizing those behaviors. So either they're isolating themselves or they're doing things we can't see when they're depressed. And that's a big problem because those are the kids that fly under the radar. And maybe, Robin, we can circle back to that because I know you guys deal with that as well. But students have reported to their teacher or their counselor that parents don't believe mental health is a thing. So can we talk about that a little bit? Like, how do we help a student when the parent doesn't agree with it or support it or believe in it? And I think we've all heard that from parents at some point. So before we go back to the issue about the fear, let's talk a little bit about parents that don't believe mental health is a thing. How are we going to get help to those kids? Robin, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, if a student is over 14, they can acquire mental health services on their own. And one benefit of telehealth is that they don't have to go places. They're able to have a session at, Pinebrook, for example, and they can speak with a therapist. As a school-based therapist, they're very encouraged by that. That, sometimes we do encourage parents, sometimes we don't. They may say in the beginning, my parents don't believe in this. And then through psychoeducation, you may be able to help their parents if they agree and maybe have a session with the parents and explain what it is. Because it's mostly that they don't understand what it's about. I have found a lot of families who were kind of not really on board. This pandemic has made them realize that, yes, indeed, it is a thing. And this is happening. It's almost sadly normalizing the high levels that people are at because it's becoming normal to be anxious and it's becoming normal to be depressed. And I don't mean normal as in not good. I mean normal as it's across the board. So they're aware of it. Their coworkers are feeling it. Their parents are feeling it. Parents of their parents. So it's become more, oh yeah, maybe that is a thing. So I've been finding it's just a little bit easier to sell with parents, but and a lot of times a trusting adult doesn't necessarily have to be a therapist. A school counselor, a favorite school teacher, to just can talk to a student and help with that. Because a lot of it is once again, normalizing some of the feelings and realizing them when they're more clinical.
That's a good point. And somebody put in the chat as well, sometimes the language you use, and Robin, I'll kick this to you as well. Sometimes the language we use can make a difference. So if we say mental health, sometimes people get a little bit concerned. And using words, as this person wrote, words like wellness works a little better. And I know you work in the wellness center, so.
Yes, exactly. I work in the wellness center, so it's a very positive turn on it, which it is. And, I'm having anxiety. Are you stressed out? More using terms that a student or a parent will understand more. And it doesn't sound as threatening, to make it something that they can understand. Or if a student is feeling symptoms, you could say to the parent, oh, has this been something you ever felt? Did you ever notice that? And sometimes it doesn't, obviously, but to get them on board and not that's a good point of not using so much clinical terminology and making it, giving it the mental health where people are fearful of the unknown.
That's a good point, and that's sort of the role of the counselors. I remember
Mhm.
when we talked to the elementary school kids on Tuesday, or the teachers on Tuesday, what someone said, and this, I just remember this, is they said, well, as a teacher, if I see some problematic behavior, I reach out to the parent, and if I don't get a response, then I kick it to the school counselor, and if the school counselor can't get a response, then they kick it to the administrator or the principal. So it
Mhm.
sounds like that as much as you guys can look at that as a team approach to deal with some of
Right.
these behaviors, and that's probably the most advantageous. But then the teacher also feels that support from the counselor and from the principal.
Sure.
That's great. Let me go back to one of the topics that was submitted during registration, and we have about 20 minutes left. So let me just thank you for stuff that you've put in the chat. Please throw something in there, something that comes to mind that, something that happened that you're not quite sure how to deal with. But one of the topics that came up was students being scared because of COVID. And I'll toss that back to Anne, but we're seeing that a lot of different ways. So I think that that's something we really kind of need to be mindful about, what students
Mhm.
believe and are told about COVID. And what are your thoughts?
We do see that because we work with all age groups. We do see that in different varying levels of fear and anxiety. But definitely we have children who already may be dealing with some anxiety and fear, and now they're at home and their parents are going out. Maybe we have families who are, have someone who's immunocompromised, and is my parent going to be alive? Am I going to die? We had a child who was asking the therapist, or brought to the therapist's attention that they were afraid they were going to die because their mom worked. So every day, mom came home from work and they thought she was bringing this terrible illness to them. Or when she was leaving in the morning, it was traumatic because there was the fear that, oh no, she's going to get sick. Maybe she'll die. Maybe I'll die. Is everybody going to die? And this is a great impact. And it's not just, I see it with my 23-year-old daughter, who is, I call her the quarantine queen. But she really is very, very strict about, following the rules with the pandemic, but it's that fear, and she deals with it, and we all do as well. I So recognizing that children who don't really understand what it means, um, and what the impact can be, I really absolutely see this exacerbating a lot of the issues that we've had in the past. The issues. And so when I think about inattention, emotional regulation, I think about so many of these things that we've all dealt with um, very differently in the past, because it was okay, we can deal with this as related to this issue, maybe trauma, maybe, current things that are happening. Now it's all of that plus the world is different, school is different, our people are dying. I'm afraid. So it has added so many other layers, and definitely been, for, I know in our program, absolutely at the forefront of so many people's minds.
What's interesting to me is the mixed messages that I think students are seeing
Mhm.
about different attitudes towards the pandemic or towards the virus. They might have, one adult in their life who's terrified and communicating all that anxiety, and another adult who believes it's all hoax, and they're saying you don't need to wear that silly mask, and that's really confusing to kids. So there really isn't a
Mhm.
consistent message that kids are hearing, because they're hearing all of these. Robin, you're nodding. You
Yeah,
experienced.
and also a key is as far as the fears the parents are having, as far as having their kids go outside or go be around anything. So they've cut off all their social, they're home for school, they've cut off all their social contacts. And, for a teenager, for a parent to even put their thumb down even further has caused a lot of conflict. Because the kids, a lot of kids think they're invincible. They don't think this will happen to them. Why is my mom like this? Why, so that has there's been a lot of conflict on that,
Okay.
I think that
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I just think that too, for a lot of kids, their support system is the school. They may
Yes.
have anyone in their home supporting them, caring for them, nurturing them in the way that we would like every child to be. It's just not realistic. It just isn't happening in all families. So for so many of the children, uh, in school, they're coming in there every day, maybe when we're in person, to see that one teacher that they know, this one gets me, this one smiles at me, this one understands me, or I just feel a connection to. They have none of that now in a lot of ways. Um, so without having family support, and it's also different now too. A lot of families that we're seeing are saying, just go do your work.
Mhm.
Just go do it. I don't know what you're doing on there. Just do it. So I think that just keeping that in mind. I think that educators need to keep that in mind, that where they may feel failings because a lot of these children maybe aren't being as attentive, maybe aren't being as invested or involved. A piece of it might be because they long for those relationships with them in person. So that's a positive to you and what you do.
I think in our last 15 minutes or so, we're going to touch more on self-care, what teachers can do, and how administrators can support teachers. But before we do that, I want to talk, there's something else in the chat, talks about bringing brain breaks and movement into the online learning schedules. And that absolutely would help kids pay attention and manage their feelings. We touched on it a little bit earlier when we talked about like the stand up and yell out their slogan, but it can be so many different things that they can do, whether it's mindfulness activities, if that's something that's familiar to you. I know a lot of our schools work with the Shanti Project as far as deep breathing or thinking of soothing things, lots of different resources out there. And I'm gonna do a plug for Resilient LV as well, because you can actually get some of those resources via the Resilient LV website. I don't know if United Way people would be willing to put that in the chat. That would be helpful. Then people could click on the link. But absolutely, and movement is really good too. If you're not going to be able to make kids do that, but if you can, take a minute, stand up, stretch, give a big yawn, walk around the room, or whatever you need to do, and like take a minute of a break where they do that movement, and that could be really, really helpful. And I think, as we said before, that can sort of bring groups back together a little bit. So we have a comment in the chat too about Loving Shanti Project. Yes, they are fabulous. And I don't, off the top of my head, know what their website might look like, but I'm guessing that there are some resources from Shanti that we can track down as well. And there's another idea in the chat, which I think is great, beginning each class session with a few minutes of meditation and a short breathing exercise to help level the tone. That can really, we actually were doing that at some of our Pinebrook meetings for a while, starting with meditation. 1 minute of deep breathing. Some people think that's like kind of new agey and weird. That's okay. It actually really works. Plenty of research behind that. So that's a really, really good way to do that. But the key too is doing it together. Again, you're not going to make kids do it. That's okay. Someone wants to turn off their camera, that's fine. But I think it shows that, yes, I know this is stressful for all of you guys, and I care about that, and we would like to help with that.
Leslie, I saw an interesting thing where a teacher was having a TikTok moment. So like in the middle of class, they would do a part of a TikTok dance together for a high school kid. So that was really engaging for them. Now, not every kid participated, but some really did. And it got laughter out, and so they would add on to it each day. That was kind of a cool thing. Yeah.
That's really cool. I can imagine my
and relatable to a high school kid and to see their teacher do it was also amusing.
Oh, that's so funny. Like, yeah, dancing would be a great, like, let's take a 1 minute, we're going to do a dance. I don't even know what the kids are doing these days, but teachers probably know. Just looking at some of the stuff in the chat, we have some of the social emotional learning curriculum. If people want to put that into their day, there's no better time for us to talk about stress management and emotional self-regulation. If we're doing that instead of algebra today, I think that's a great idea, because, this is really, really important, relevant information. So please do check out some of the links in the site. We have the link for Resilient LV as well. And we do have a message too. People are talking about, in addition to the fear of death related to COVID, some of the students of color are expressing fear of being in the community. And I definitely don't want to minimize or overlook some of the racial tensions that we've experienced over this past year. So that's actually pretty difficult. Talking about advice on how to restore those relations and encourage educators to keep trying to reach out to those students. Interesting. I'm not sure about any thoughts of that. I don't know if teachers are trying to have those conversations during their classrooms. We obviously don't want to call on kids of color and sort of single them out in that way. But I think that there's probably a lot of resources that we can think about for discussions about race and that kind of thing. And at the end of the presentation, we're going to give you an email address that you can ask additional questions. So you can reach out to us for that. So yeah, so there are Shanti Project videos on the Resilient LV Facebook page. So let's, definitely refer people to that. So those are really, really great. And there's also some resources on Resilient LV from some of our partners, CACLV, Dr. Hashan Batts, Dr. Chris Liang, and there's a lot of coaching available in racial justice and diversity, inclusion, and so on and so forth. So please check out the chat for some of those things. In our last few minutes, though, I want to talk about not only self-care for teachers, but how the administrators can support that, because a lot of administrators submitted those questions. How do we support teachers? And we've had in some of the past office hours, we've had them submit that in the chat as well. So as far as principals, I'm going to toss this to Robin. What are some of your recommendations for administrators and principals for supporting the teachers?
Sure. I think one of the biggest things that I've noticed that teachers want is just someone listening to them and know that their admin's door is open and open for conversation. And that's what I've found teachers want to hear the most. Let your staff know that I get it. I know what you're feeling. I understand this, and that we're working together. But mostly that open door policy, that they can come to them with questions and concerns.
That's great. And I'll pass that to Anne in a second as well. But I know one thing that we do as supervisors is we say, tell me what's the most difficult thing for you right now? What is the most stressful thing on your list? And right. I'm often surprised about, well, maybe I thought it was a work-related thing. No, it's a home-related thing that I didn't even know that person was dealing with. So that's just a great way to open that discussion. Tell me what's the most stressful thing for you right now. Because teachers are, they're dealing with that frontline level. And I had a teacher friend say to me, oh my gosh, my principal's getting on my case about not submitting my Google documents, but oh my gosh, they have an idea that I have to deal with every day. Joey is doing this online. Right. And exactly. I empathize, but I pointed out that, okay, but keep in mind that your principal has accountability to people too. So we're all bam. Right. And any thoughts about that as far as how a principal could support a teacher?
Well, I was thinking just about myself and with my team. And self-care is something that we discuss a lot in family base as far as for team members. And throughout this pandemic, we do a great deal of clinical supervision weekly. And so we meet as a group and I meet with teams. And so it's every week we do this. And I have noticed over time, that's where people bring up their concerns, what's bothering, what's most difficult. And more, it's less attentive. A lot of our students, less attentive, less buy-in, and I came to a realization this week, and I was thinking about it in terms of teachers, and maybe this might help a little bit, or a thought at least. I had my holiday event that we usually do in person at a restaurant every year. And I thought, well, I want to have some sort of normalcy, so let's do it online. And it was supposed to be from 6 to 8. I thought it would last till about 7. 8:30, I'm finally trying to kick people off, okay, it's 8:30 and we're still here talking. And there was some work talk, and what it ended up being was a lot of people supporting each other, not so much talking about specifics of work, but wow, you really do a great job in this. And, I'm so thankful to have you on my team. And, we do and it was this amazing experience. And I thought a lot about that the next day. And I've been thinking about it in terms of teachers. It's something that I'm going to start implementing monthly, not a holiday event, but something where prior to, for an hour, we're just going to do an hour, send out an activity, like an idea. of, okay, everybody come, we're going to ask each other this question, some kind of icebreaker thing that we do as a group for 1 hour where it's just, we don't have to talk about work. Let's just be here to support each other. If you want to talk about work, if you want to talk about what's going on with you, what your struggles are. But I'll tell you what, it was amazing to see morale in the group go from like 0 to 60 in that time period. So I'm absolutely going to utilize it. And I was thinking about teachers who must also feel that isolation from one another, that maybe it's something that the school could implement, or maybe it's something amongst teachers themselves. Look, this is my normal clique, in school. Maybe we should set up this once a month where we just have, a little session together. We sit, have our evening coffee, and just gather and talk about, those things that are going on, that feeling of togetherness, oneness, because we are all in it together and we're all struggling in our own ways. And it really, to feel the same boatism and support from people going through that with you, and just to be able to laugh. That's for family based. We do a lot of activities and people think, oh, why are you doing activities? And I was thinking about the getting up and moving during classes. Movement and active therapy, active education, it activates a different part of the brain. And that's what our model is focused on. And I think that would be really helpful. But I think that also would be very helpful for teachers to come together maybe in that same way.
That's a really good idea, because I know that there's a partner school, one of our partner schools does that. And they do it weekly. They used to do it live, now they do it virtually. And they really have a, like, I'm not sure what time their school starts, but that hour, that 45 minutes before school starts, and sometimes they've done it after school, where they sit there and they can say whatever they want, whether they want to talk about the student that's driving them nuts, or they want to talk about what's going on in their personal lives. But it's really just this sharing time for teachers. And they've had some really, really good success with that, and lots of buy-in. So, and I think that there's something else that we can talk about if we haven't really touched on this throughout, is that this is not normal times. When we do trauma training, we remind people that a response to trauma is a normal response to an abnormal situation. So what we're all having right now are very normal responses to what's an incredibly abnormal situation for us. So this pandemic is weird. It's causing everything to be different. And I think the important thing to remember is we're all in it together. It's different for all of us, and nobody has got this down. Like, if you're on Facebook and you're seeing someone else's post and you're thinking they got this down and they're doing it great, they're not. That's just what they're posting. And
True.
the other thing to remember about that is that this is going to be over. That's how pandemics work. So, and none of our kids are going to like fail in life because your 2020 school year screwed them up for life. So it's really important to give yourself a break with some of that. I'm going to kick it to Robin too, because I know she has good things to say about this too. But just remember, this isn't permanent. This is going to be over, and things will go back to more manageable for all of us. Robin, what are your thoughts?
Right, I couldn't agree more. I think it's very important at this time to take a step back and say, okay, wait a minute. There's all these things happening. The pandemic's happening. I'm online learning. My kids are here. My dog is barking. They're shoveling outside, all kinds of things that are distractions. And you have to say, okay, it's not the end of the world. It's not the end of the world if I don't get to my algebra lesson today. We'll do it tomorrow. My kids needed this more. And like, my favorite term is giving yourself grace, having the ability to say, it can't be that. I can't do it. I can't do it all. And that's very difficult for some people. It's very difficult for me. I know that it's been hard to like take a step back, and people who are working from home that we're all doing now, having those hours, stop it at 5 o'clock or 3 o'clock, whenever your day's over, and walk away from it. We have a tendency to say, oh, let me just do this, keep doing this. But you have to take care of yourself first. You have to, I like the analogy of being in an airplane, and you always put your oxygen mask on before your child. It's the same thing. If we're not doing well, we're not going to be any good to anybody else.
Right. Let's throw perfection out the window right now, because
Exactly. Even like, not even perfection, just sometimes getting through the day,
That's a good point. Sometimes for me, it's like either taking a nap or going for a walk, and I think, oh, I really
Right.
should be doing whatever,
Right.
whether it's desk work or professional work, but I'm like, no, I just don't have it anymore. I don't got it. So,
Yeah.
and forgiving ourselves for that, especially if you're an overachiever and you're thinking I have to do this perfectly for every child, they're going to be okay. The kids are going to survive. They're going to survive the maybe not wonderful algebra lesson that you had today. So
Right.
that's
You can even say, what's the worst thing that could happen if this doesn't happen? So, if everyone doesn't participate in class today, what's the worst thing that can happen? Nothing. So to make yourself realize that, okay, maybe this isn't as big a deal. What's the worst thing that could happen if I didn't make dinner tonight? We order a pizza. So letting yourself know that it's okay not to be doing what you did prior to this.
okay. And anything else to add on self-care?
Well, I'm just thinking that as caregivers, as educators are, as those of us who work in the mental health field, we're caregivers. So we are automatically thinking of the needs of others first. And I know that I'm sitting here thinking how many times I've done it in my life and how many times I've heard this even in the schools doing trauma trainings where I hear, who has time for that? Who has time for that? And I think, as Robin said, working virtually, I think we make ourselves feel like we have less time because we're on the computer all day. And then it's like, okay, well, maybe I'll do a little more. And then people are still maybe contacting us, or well, let me just check this, get a head start. Plus I have my family or these things going on. I think that as we set up structure for students, I think we have to for ourselves as well, whether we build in 10 minutes where I'm going behind a closed door and maybe doing some of those relaxation exercises for myself right now.
Just touch base with what's on the chat in our last minute here. Somebody posted in the chat that the Lehigh Valley Writing Project will be hosting sessions for local teachers to celebrate successes and share struggles in January, February, and March. And yeah, if you can pass on that, I don't know if there's a website or Zoom information. If you want to put it in the chat, that would be really, really great. It looks really, really neat. And someone else put that NAMI of the Lehigh Valley is also offering a Real Talk support group for anyone who needs a place to connect. And that link is in the chat as well. So I really want to thank you guys for putting those things out there in the chat. That's so useful to everybody. And I hope that everybody can take advantage of that. So we're just going to sort of wind up, and we wanted to make sure that if there are additional questions or concerns, people had a forum to ask those. So I don't know if Maddie, if you have the slide from the United Way, as far as what the finishing slide that has that email address on it, but I'll say it anyway. It is officehours@pbfa.org. So I'm going to put that in the chat as well. So if you guys have any questions and you want to send it to this email address, then we'll get that and we'll review it with everybody. Oh, she's got it. Thank you so much. Good, because I was going to spell it wrong. Okay. So if you have anything that you'd like to ask or share or pass on, we would be really, really happy to answer any of those questions that you have. Anything last minute I'm going to put in the chat? We're going to wind up. All right, United Way, you have anything you want to add?
Just want to thank you all. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Anne. And thank you to all the participants for joining us today and spending an hour on an official snow day for many of you. So thank you for that. And again, we'll be posting these recordings within the few weeks on Resilient Lehigh Valley website, and wishing you all a safe and healthy holiday season.